Welcome to the Ghoul's Guide to Santa Barbara. Please just put me somewhere where there's no bees.
Oh no, it's not My Girl, is it?
Oh God, no!
It sounded so sad.
That's like up with Artax and the Swamp of
look, I'm
Sad.
tearing up.
Oh my God. Oh, honey.
It's too soon.
It's too soon.
Well, this
I'm
just
so
took a turn.
sorry. Should I just tell you what it is? Okay, so it's from Jackass 3D, weirdos. It's nothing sad. And the quote is from Dave England, who is my favorite for authentically horrified one-liner reactions in Jackass, which I'm currently obsessed with. Not Dave England. Sorry, Dave England. I didn't mean to scare you, but just Jackass in general. But Dave England is like, he's from Ojai, which is
Oh, is he really?
adjacent. Or he lives in
that's
Ojai
close.
now.
Close to
Yeah.
Santa Barbara.
You're still crying! Jesus!
Now it's laughing, though. It's laughing tears.
Oh, Macaulay.
Okay.
Oh, I'm okay. Phew.
Note to self, never mention bees in the movie quote.
I feel like we should have guessed that you were going to do a Jackass.
I know.
Summers has been Summers has been showering us with Jackass content in our DMs for
Unwanted context, which is my specialty.
weeks.
And I've been holding back on doing a quote. And I actually really looked really hard to see if there was any connection to Santa Barbara from Jackass, so I could maybe make that a dark history episode. There's no connection.
What is the context of this quote from him?
Oh, he and Steve-O were doing tetherball, but it was like this stupid thing filled with bees.
I was going to say, was it a
right.
beehive?
That sounds right.
About right.
Oh my
Beehive
gosh.
tetherball.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Woo. Well, anyhow. My Girl is not on my movie list because I never want to watch it again.
I don't think when that bee attack happens, he has much time to speak.
Oh no. Okay, moving on. Today on the Ghoul's Guide to Santa Barbara, Jen is going to tell us the story of the Honda Point disaster, which is probably far less tragic than My Girl.
Don't count on it.
Might be equally.
Oh no.
So I just have to take a minute before I start to make a very sincere and humble apology.
Oh no.
Because I was listening to our first episode and I realized that, yes, I kept referring to the year 300.
Oh,
even though I initially started by saying that she lived during the 3rd century.
Oh, St. Barbara.
And of course, the 3rd century is 201 to 300 AD.
Okay.
So I apologize.
I didn't even notice.
Just everywhere that I said, it's the 300s. Just imagine that I said the 200s. And then I will be able to move on with my life. I am not, in fact, going to go through each episode and write down all of my errors.
Oh, good, because I'm not doing that about my errors. I'm letting them go.
Just going forward, if you hear me say something completely stupid, just know that I probably heard it
And you're going to be
later.
thinking about it for the rest of your life.
I will be obsessing over it.
I'll just take that little snippet of you saying 200s and insert it.
So if you ever are driving
re-upload.
down a dark road and I appear in a long white dress, I'm probably just going to tell you all the dumb stuff I said on this podcast and that I know I was wrong.
Can we just declare the podcast like a no stress, no repeating at night before you fall asleep zone? I don't want you to have stress over it.
So that being said, today I'm going to tell you about something again that I had never heard of. And now I can't believe that I never even knew that this happened here.
Yeah, I've never heard of it either.
Me neither.
So this is from my research, it seems like a pretty famous, quote unquote, maritime disaster. And I am kind of into maritime stuff. So
Disasters or just maritime in general?
I think probably slanted towards disaster, just like most of my life.
Same.
I remember as a kid being like really into the sinking of the Andrea Doria, and I read a book
Ooh.
about it. And like I think it started when we read like the Battle of Midway Island in like 5th grade, and it was like all this technical like stuff about naval battle, and
Cool.
and it was really interesting to me. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's like old paintings of ships all over my home here.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Nautical,
it's a nautical
styling.
theme.
yes, so I'm really interested in that.
I didn't know it was a shipwreck theme. I like it. It adds depth.
Yeah. So Honda Point, also referred to as Point Pedernales, is a 3-mile stretch just north of the entrance of the Santa Barbara Channel. It was a known hazard since the 16th century. Don't quote me.
Is that
Don't
1500s?
quiz me on which years that was.
1500s AD.
So that area is nicknamed the Devil's Jaw
Ooh.
and is part of a larger area that's referred to as the Graveyard of the Pacific.
Oh, what?
And multiple references referred to it as being like the California Bermuda Triangle. So like as infamous as the Bermuda Triangle.
Wow.
Yeah, how did we not know this existed?
Seriously.
Like
Can I
a few
go out
miles
on a
north of
limb?
us.
Say it's not as infamous.
I know, right?
But I like the idea that
It's
could be.
just as famous.
Maybe
this thing you've never heard of.
amongst the seafaring folk.
Yeah, that was like, I mean, maybe among Navy men. It's just as famous among its target audience.
Yeah.
Men with corncob pipes.
Yes, men on ships. People who happen to be on a boat in the exact area that this occurred.
100% of them
Know
know about
them
it.
know about this. All the people involved feel like it's just as bad as the Bermuda Triangle.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
Yikes.
Maybe it's as infamous as the Bermuda Triangle because all the people that know about it disappeared. I want to give a shout out to Spectator with a K on YouTube for their really cool Honda Point disaster animated. It was a video that I referenced multiple times on YouTube. Super well done. I highly recommend watching it. It's really cool because it's all animated, and he like will talk about something, and then it'll like rewind, and then he'll like talk about another part that happened, like, and zoom in on that one. Like it's really well done, and it's very interesting. If you're not totally over this story by the time I'm done. So this story is a good example of how pride can start a series of events, and if unchecked, can lead to tragedy. So
Please see also the Titanic.
yeah, it's similar in that vein where like just a lot of people made some pretty innocuous bad choices, but it's one of those things where like maybe if one of these things hadn't happened, like if one thing had been different, could this whole thing have been avoided? So our story takes place at the end of summer 1923. The Navy had just completed its summer Pacific Battle Fleet maneuvers in the Puget Sound area. There had been, like, during, I think earlier in the course of this kind of program, there had been a crash. And so everyone was kind of feeling like a bit defensive, like they kind of needed to prove themselves again on this second leg of this summer. The ships that we're going to be talking about is a group of Clemson-class destroyers, which were the new state-of-the-art long, narrow ships. They were lighter armored and gunned than some of the other heavy battleships, and the ships depended on their swiftness to deliver the most potent weapons, which were their torpedoes. So they were kind of like light and like easily
Fast.
maneuverable and fast, and could get in there and torpedo things and then get out again. So Destroyer Squad 11, which is also referred to as Desron 11. I'm going to be throwing out quite a bit of like maritime terminology that like I'm going to try to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I also have little notes for like
Shall we publish a glossary?
for the rest of us. No, I'll just tell you what.
Okay.
My brain is picturing Top Gun, but old timey.
But
I'm
like
just gonna be
1920s
like,
Navy.
Yeah. So Yeah, like every ship has a name, but then also numbers, and so I'm going to leave out some of that. So if you can dig more into this kind of stuff if you're really into it. There was 19 ships, part of Destroyer Squad 11. One of them was left in dry dock up in San Francisco. So our story starts. This part of it starts in San Francisco. They've finished up these earlier maneuvers and they are getting ready to head back down to their home port of San Diego after a stop in San Francisco. So originally they had 19 ships. One of them is dry dock. So the rest of the 18 ships are set to head back. Normally, the capacity on these destroyers is 131. But due to budget cuts and restrictions, they were operating at about 70% capacity.
Okay.
So that is, I pointed out because it could have been worse.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is kind of a good part of the story. So on the night of September 8th, 1923, Commander Edward H. Watson gathers his principal officers to go over the course plans for their trip down to San Diego. Commander Watson he's been in the Navy for 27 years. He's a well-respected and well-traveled commander. He is the commander of Desron 11, and he communicates to his crew that previously, because of the budget constraints, they had been rationing fuel consumption. And so these guys had been limited to not exceeding 15 knots when they were cruising or making passages. So now it's the new fiscal year and they've been granted permission to use the trip for a 20-knot run to test their cruising turbines. For those lay people, 20 knots is about 23 miles per hour.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
So they're all excited. They're like, yes, we're going to go do this
So fast.
so fast trip. It's like, so like imagine a scene from the Fast and the Furious. They're all at the Toretto's backyard.
Oh my gosh.
They're talking about how tomorrow they're going to get all their cars and they're going to go super fast.
Okay.
This is the feeling that we're having here. Edward Watson is clearly Dom Toretto.
Okay.
I don't know why I went there. Anyways, okay, so randomly there is a potentially unauthorized guest on the ship, Eugene Duman, who is a career diplomat and served in Japan with Commander Watson. So basically he's his buddy and he's like, hey, you want to go down, like we're heading back to San Diego, you want to come with us?
Uh-huh.
And they claim later that their admiral had authorized him being on the boat.
Okay.
But that's like questionable. Really, it seems like he wanted to chat with his buddy on the trip.
Okay.
Another thing that has happened recently is that on September 1st of this year, so a week ago, the Great Kanto earthquake had struck Japan with a magnitude of 7.9, causing devastation, the loss of over 140,000 lives, and caused tsunamis with waves up to 33 feet high to hit the islands.
Which islands? Sorry.
It took out like most of the significant areas of the islands of Japan.
Got
so
it.
like
Okay.
So like Tokyo was very hardly hit. It's worth looking into. It was a terrible earthquake. Started fires that then took out the whole cities and
Whoa. Oh my gosh.
but
I'm so sorry I laughed. I just meant nothing is worth looking into for me. So I don't do extra credit. Wasn't laughing at the
I was not
earthquake.
telling you. I was indicating
I
to our
know.
readers that we're not going to do an episode on it.
Yeah.
Somebody else probably did.
Yeah.
Find their podcast, listen
Okay.
to theirs. But for the context of our story, the earthquake caused unusually large swells and powerful currents in the Pacific Ocean, reaching as far as the coast of California. So that was a week before this, and so
It's
by
still
the
kinda
by
happening.
the tide, it would be they'd be experiencing a lot of this on their trip.
Okay.
And probably maybe didn't take that into consideration. Another thing that had happened recently was that new radio navigation techniques referred to as the RDF, which utilized a series of stations on shore in tandem with equipment recently installed on board, was something that they had been trying out to various degrees of success. But because it was so new, it was really untrusted by the crew. So instead, they were still relying on what is referred to as dead reckoning, which is a system of navigation based on calculating current position based on a previously determined position and estimates of speed, heading, and elapsed time.
Wow.
Okay.
So you would pretty much be like, well, I left San Diego at 3 and it takes 4 hours to get there. So after 2 hours, I can, if it takes me this long, so after 2 hours, I'm about halfway there.
That is wild.
And like, that's how you would guess. Like,
Okay.
I did not know that that's what that term meant at all.
I know. It would be
Yeah.
a really good band name.
It's
Yeah.
actually there was a historical fiction written about this by a couple that lives in Santa Barbara, and it's called Dead Reckoning.
Oh, cool.
So another part of calculating with Dead Reckoning has something to do with propeller speed,
Okay.
and that will come in later into the story. Another issue with Dead Reckoning is it doesn't take into account other variables like wind or other undercurrents. So like, if I say, if I look up the distance between LA and Santa Barbara, it says it'll take me 2 hours. But if I leave here at 3 on a Friday,
Right. Okay.
I'm probably going to be in the car 5 hours.
Yeah.
So during the pre-trip meeting, Commander Watson determined that his flagship would handle all the navigation. So the way that they run these courses is that the ship in the front is the flagship, and they determine the navigation for their ships that are following behind them. They run in different formations. And so you could have a group of ships that then are broken into smaller groups, and then they might each have a flagship for their group.
Okay.
But he has decided, hey guys, the front ship, the flagship is going to be for the entire group, no matter what. Even if you have a secondary flagship, like we're all going off our calculations. So what we say goes. The plan was to follow the coast and travel into the Santa Barbara Channel. So the Santa Barbara Channel Islands are 160-mile long 8-island archipelago that's made up of San Miguel, Santa Rosa, Santa Cruz, Anacapa, Santa Barbara, San Nicolas, Santa Catalina, and San Clemente Island. They run parallel to the coast from San Miguel all the way down.
Can you say that word again?
It's
Which one?
archipelago.
Archipelago?
Pelago.
Archipelago.
Pelago.
So prior to being displaced by the Spaniards who colonized the region, the lower islands were home to the Tongva people, who also inhabited the LA area, and the northern 5 islands were inhabited by the Chumash,
Okay.
who named them Tuquan, Wima, Limu, and Yapak. And that's to the best of my understanding of how they're pronounced. I am probably not completely accurate, and I apologize for that. The deep connection between the Chumash and the islands and their marine ecosystems enhanced the rich maritime history of our area. The Santa Barbara Channel was and is also used by commercial shipping, fishing industry, and the Navy, as in this instance. So it creates a protected channel along the coast for a big chunk of that route from San Francisco to San Diego.
So that's why
Yeah.
they go through
So
it. Okay.
yeah, so rather than going out and around the islands in deeper water that's more open to the elements, they
Okay, that
were
makes sense.
planning to go through the channel. So on the morning of September 8th, 1923, they leave San Francisco at approximately 7 o'clock in the morning to engage in some short-range battle practice, and then at around 11, they set their course for San Diego. So there's 18 ships total in Destroyer Squad 11. After we said there was 19, and then there's one dry docked. So before they left, the squad was reduced to 15 ships. So 2 of them left at midnight the night before in the company of the squadron tender due to engine issues. So they wanted to have extra time to make their way slower down.
They left earlier.
Yeah, they left
Okay.
like at midnight the night
Got it.
before.
Okay.
Just because they weren't going to haul it at 20 knots.
Got it.
The third, the SS Reno, had permission to add additional testing to their program. So they like kind of left and went off on their own. They left a little earlier and were going to kind of do their own thing for a bit. So the flagship U.S. Delphi was in charge of navigation for the fleet. Lieutenant Commander Donald T. Hunter, who's Delphi's captain, assumed primary navigational control of both the ship and then the subsequent rest of the squad. So this relegated the navigator, Lieutenant Junior Grade Lawrence Blodgett, to the uncomfortable supporting role. So he kind of got like demoted because they were making all these decisions.
Okay.
Mr. Blodgett, it's Blodgett.
Yeah, Blodgett.
That
Blodgett?
sounds like
Okay.
Blodgett to me.
I feel like I kind of didn't pronounce it great at the beginning. He was highly regarded, taught at the U.S. Naval Academy, but he was kind of old school before the new RDF, and so he viewed the new tech with skepticism. Commander Hunter shared Commander Watson's views and suggested erring on the side of caution would not be welcomed. So
Good. Oh, good.
so basically, yeah, Hunter and Watson are like, we're gonna like, we got the okay to like just go at it, and we're gonna like, they wanted like a record travel from San Francisco to San Diego. So they were
Okay.
they were like, they gave us the okay, we're going for bragging rights. Like, we're just gonna book it down there and see how
Okay.
fast we can all get down there. And these guys were kind of like, okay. The remaining ships traveled out or headed out in 3 divisions. So so you had your flagships, and then they followed along like ducks behind their mother. So we have, so behind flagship Delphi, we have Division 33, which is made up of flagship SS SP Lee, followed by SS Young, SS Woodbury, and SS Nicholas. Then we have Division 31 with flagship USS Farragut, followed by SS Fuller, SS Percival, SS Summers, and
Oh,
SS
nice.
Chauncey.
Do I die? Do I sink?
You're going to have to wait.
Ah.
Then last in our grouping, we have Division 32, made up of flagship SS Kennedy, SS Paul Hamilton, SS Stoddart, and SS Thompson.
Okay.
I'm guessing none of these were women they were named after.
No, they're buddies, like the guy on the boat. That's it. So, quick question, just to clarify. So we've got a couple boats, ships, I guess I'm supposed to say, not boats. Sorry, are kind of just like sidelined a bit because they're not working right. Is that right? The mechanical.
So we have
errors?
one in dry dock in San Francisco.
Right, and
We
then-
have 2 that left early and
Right.
kind of went with a tender because they were kind of like, if we're going
What's
back
a
to my Fast and
tender?
Furious.
Sorry.
So kind of like a med boat.
Oh,
You want to think of
okay.
it that way, like
Okay.
like someone that's gonna kind of like help kind of guide them down, not like a tugboat, but like a boat
nursemaid.
that's- yeah,
Okay.
a nursemaid boat that's gonna
Okay, and the
kinda-
flagship is usually first, but
The
in this
flagship is
case, it's
first.
not first because
So
like
we
there are
have-
these other contingents.
So if you picture like Galaga, so you have your
No.
one ship here, and then you have your other ships, like 3, and then they're
I have no
behind
idea
them.
what that reference is, but okay, I got it.
like
Got it.
Tetris.
Oh yeah,
They're coming down,
All right.
and so like we have 1 in the front, and then we have 3 behind.
but the ones
are
that
in.
left early because they were lagging,
they're gone. They're
not
out
the
of-
flagship, even though they're first, because usually it's the first one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But they're not
not, like, part
traveling
of the
in
main-
formation
Oh,
with
okay,
these
okay.
guys. They
Got
like
it.
already left. Like
Okay.
they left early.
Thank you for clarifying for my
No,
non-nautical
if you
brain.
watch that YouTube video, it's 15 minutes long. Highly recommend it because
Okay.
like he shows. Yeah,
I'll do it
it's
for you.
Nice. So around 1300 hours or 1330, so at like 1:30 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
The SS Reno, who's the one who took off before,
Mm-hmm.
they had been authorized to do some additional maneuvers, so they kind of headed out before everyone else.
Right.
So the SS Reno encounters a lifeboat with survivors who alert them to a steamer, the SS Cuba, who had run aground on San Miguel Island.
Oh, wow.
And if you remember, so for those who don't live here, San Miguel is the northernmost island in the Channel Islands.
Okay.
So Reno's division chief, Commander Walter G. Roper, calls Commander Watson, who's on our flagship Delphi, to ask for assistance. And Watson's like, I'd love to help, but like we've really gotta like we're cruising.
We're
Yeah.
looking for the top speed.
Exactly. I mean, like The Rock is here, and I gotta like, I want to look good.
I've never seen that movie or any of those movies.
So they have words. It gets a bit heated. Roper eventually yields, but Roper was a voice of authority among the squadron officers, and so he realizes that like there's a lot of ship captains on this line, like overhearing this conversation.
Oh, okay.
And so he's like, I'm gonna let him dig his own grave, and I'm just gonna be like, okay, great, have fun.
Wow.
Have fun storming the castle.
Okay.
Yeah, so they said they didn't have time to assist, and he just kind of like is like, fine, whatever. So a little bit later at 1400, I don't know. I know how to say like 1400 hours, but I don't know if it's like 1415. Is that 1500 hours? I don't know.
1415? I don't know. Just say 1415.
Yeah.
So basically we're like at 2:15 now in the afternoon. Commander Hunter, who's back on the Delphi, he's the one who like got kicked to the curb a little bit. So he calls in to the Port Arguello RDF station. So the RDF, member is like, they have some radio navigational tracking system on their stuff, but basically the way that they calculate this is like they call in to a station that exists on the coast, and they're like, hey guys, we estimate we're about here, where do you estimate we're at? And then they just like confirm those things. So at, what did I say, 2:15, Commander Hunter calls in to the station for a bearing and realizes that it doesn't align with his calculations. They utilize the lighthouses along the coast to help with their establishing of where they're at and their navigation.
Okay.
But the conditions have become hazy, and so they miss some of the lighthouses. So they're like, well, we haven't seen the lighthouse yet, so we can't be that far south. And they're like,
this is a good
well,
system.
no, you're past that.
So they're further along than they thought they should be?
I'm not sure exactly.
All right. Well, can I just
yeah.
say, like 1920s? Like this, I just thought maybe ocean travel was more advanced by this time than this sounds.
I mean, when you think about it, like we were driving around in cars until like the 80s without seatbelts on.
True.
We were just like, woo, we're good.
True. Okay.
Oh, sorry. I referred to Commander Hunter as the one who had kind of gotten kicked to the curb, but that's Lieutenant Blodgett.
Oh, I like Blodgett a lot.
Suggests that some of the ships move closer to shore for verification of their locations. And Hunter shoots it down because he's like, no, we'd have to slow down to do that.
So this is like very much top-down leadership.
Yes.
There's no collaborative decision making at all. Okay.
Yeah. So one of my references was a U.S. Naval Institute article by Noah Andre Trudeau. And I'm going to read a quote from that says, with Lieutenant Blodgett relegated to muttering his complaints to silent subordinates, because I could relate, Captain Watson became the best check on Hunter's estimates. But the commander, fully engaged in his discussions with his civilian passenger, made only brief visits to the bridge. Such was his respect for Hunter's navigational acumen that he merely received the information given to him and did not process it. Hunter, for his part, took Watson's silent nods as affirmation of his calculations. So, in case you haven't noticed, we're kind of brewing a perfect storm here.
Yeah.
So, like, this guy's distracted, and he's like, no, okay,
knows what he's
whatever, I
doing.
trust
Yeah.
you, I know what you're doing. And this guy's like, oh, he doesn't have any criticisms for me, so I must be, he must trust
Everything's cool.
Like, everything's good.
Oh my
Yeah, we're
gosh.
good.
Yikes.
So later in the afternoon, the SS John Francis Burns had a boiler room issue and dropped out of formation, leaving Desron 11 down to 14 ships. So at 1627, which I'm going to try and do my calculations.
427.
So right before 4:30, the Delphi, which is our flagship, signals Desron 11 into squadron cruising formation number 18, which is basically a single column.
Okay.
So Delphi's now the southernmost ship, and everyone else is just like
lined
ducks
up.
in a row.
Okay.
Yeah. So at 1700 hours, it's getting hazy enough that Watson orders everyone turn their running lights on. Due to the speed and conditions, it's estimated there's about a third of a minute between each of these ships. So they're going 23 miles an hour.
Oh.
And like they're close enough that if you were like watching them go by, there'd only like, if you were calculating it, there'd be like a third of a minute. I honestly, I read a third of a minute, or no, I heard a third of a minute on one of the YouTube videos, and I wrote it down. And then I was like, what is a third of a minute? And I just can't even commit enough brain space.
20 seconds?
So about 20 seconds.
That's fast.
That's really fast.
Yeah. So these guys are like back to front.
Like really close to
or
each
front
other.
to back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
great.
they're very close. Again, perfect storm.
That's like in a car
So
on the road. That's,
So
that's
14
close.
ships like booking it down the free. So yeah, like a scene from Fast and the Furious.
Like my drive over here today.
Yeah, pretty much. So the destroyers on board have one more valuable tool. It's called a fathometer.
Fathometer?
Fathometer. So it's a 50 fathom line for measuring the depth and signaling the edge of the coast. So basically, they can use it to measure, like if they're getting too close to the coastline.
Okay.
They can drop this down, and I mean, it sounds like
Just how deep the water is.
yeah,
right?
like if you just put like your anchor down and like, oh, it hit, and I can measure this line, so that's how far we are to the bottom.
Huh.
But the fathometer could not be used at 20 knots.
Right, because they'd just be trailing behind them,
Exactly.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So
They're like, it's at like a 45-degree angle. And
know.
they're like,
they're like, we got lots of
Yeah.
it's really deep here. So as night approaches, fog continued to roll in heavily, denying them all their visual checkpoints.
Great.
Creating more discrepancies between their calculations and the radio navigation. At 8 o'clock, Hunter radios the squadron's position to their admiral, but he ignored standard practice of checking in with the division commanders, who had been basically ignoring the prohibition against monitoring the channels. So basically, like, they had said, hey guys, it's cool, we're going to handle all the navigation from the first ship. But these guys are like, I'm obligated to the rest of my crew,
Right.
so I'm just going to like listen to
listen.
what you guys are like when they're checking in on their like the RFP checkpoints, like when they're calling in and trying to get a position, like they're just kind of listening in on the channels. And so they're picking up on the fact that like these guys don't actually know where we are, but nobody really questions the differences in readings. And these guys kind of assume that the flagship maybe had better data because they have direct communication. So they're like, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, we're playing telephone here and we're just kind of listening in on the conversations. They made the decision that they were going to be in charge. Maybe we should just trust that they know what they're doing. So on and off, this is the way things are going. There's just a lot of confusion as to like everyone's feeling a little bit uneasy about like nobody feels uber confident exactly where they are, except for apparently Captain Watson or Commander Watson. He starts getting a little concerned that they're too far south because of all this discrepancies. And he starts getting worried that they're getting close to San Miguel. Like he's also like, oh, that boat ran into San Miguel earlier. I just don't want that to happen to us.
That's the first island.
Yes, that's the northernmost island. So he's like, you know what? I'm just going to call it. He makes the final call, and at 2100 hours, 9 o'clock p.m., he directs the ships to turn to port, east, left, covering all the bases, thinking that this would put them into the channel. So he thinks that they're right there at San Miguel. He thinks if they go left, it's going to put them between the islands and the coast of Santa Barbara County.
But it's foggy and they can't see and they don't super know where they are.
Exactly.
Yeah, and they're not
But
listening
he's like,
to the RDF guys.
yeah. For reasons never explained, the flagship did not signal the course change, causing momentary confusion as her 13 consorts hurriedly replicate the maneuver. So he's like, you guys, we just got to turn left. And so the Delphi just turns left. And then everyone's like, wait, what? We're going left? It's like when you're, you know, in a carpool, like in a... You're all in a caravan and the first person just switches lanes and you're like, you didn't even put your signal on. What are we doing? So without knowing, all 14 ships that are now about 1.5 miles offshore have now turned, heading almost full speed into the rocky cliffs of the shore.
Off the shore of just California, not the islands, right? So
they think that they're turning like into the Santa Barbara Channel.
But they're really just turning into the
north,
land.
and they're really just turning straight into the coast of California.
Fantastic.
4 minutes after they change their direction, the SS Young, who's third in line, suddenly lurches up and then drops straight down into the water. They had hit a submerged reef, causing a massive gash along the starboard right side of the ship. Water rushes in. Within 90 seconds, the SS Young is capsized to its side, and all the men are ordered to evacuate. The sailors spill onto the side of the boat. Many of them are trapped inside. A few of them stay in the boiler room, trying to extinguish flames to avoid the whole ship exploding.
Oh my gosh.
Because now we have like fuel spilling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's on its side. 19 crewmen are trapped in their quarters below deck. 3 others are lost at sea on a raft. Another drowned after being blinded by shattered glass in the collision. Okay, this is where we get to Macaulay Culkin territory.
Oh no.
A Cocker Spaniel named Doctor, the mascot of the Young, went down with his ship.
Oh, buddy.
Poor little Doctor. So next, the Delphi who's in front, who doesn't realize what has happened to Young because it's third in line. Delphi runs bow first straight into the Devil's Jaw rocks just offshore.
No way.
Wow.
The stern breaks off due to the head-on impact. Crew immediately initiate emergency procedures, though they're confused and shocked, and they use sirens to try to alert the other ships. After a short while, the Delphi also capsizes.
Is the stern the back of the boat?
The front, right?
I think
The
it's
stern?
I don't know.
I mean, it would make sense that it's the front if they
That's what I
ran,
thought.
because
Into
they
the rocks,
like
yeah.
turned and then went straight
Into the
head
coast.
first into the coast.
That is wild.
It is the rear of the boat.
Oh.
Oh well, I
Says
read it
Google.
as I read stern, but maybe I don't know. What
I mean,
is
it
the
makes
front?
sense that it just broke in half.
The bow?
Like,
Yeah, or maybe
Bow is the front.
you know, I don't know. Maybe it like maybe they bounced because
Yeah.
they turn into like this whole really ragged. So this point is just kind of littered with rocky.
Oh,
Maybe
it
the
like,
back
does make
broke
sense.
off.
stuff.
Yeah.
The front is stuck on the rocks, maybe, and the back breaks off.
Yeah.
Okay.
So SS Lee, who was second in line, remember, saw Delphi hit and sees the emergency lights, thinking they've now run aground on San Miguel, immediately turns left to avoid running straight into the back of the Delphi, and turns what they think is into the deeper channel. Instead, they've just turned and gone slightly up the coast
Oh my
and run
gosh.
aground on the rocky coastline shortly
wow.
after. But Lee doesn't sustain as much damage.
The front didn't fall off.
Yeah, they just like scrape along the bottom. Unfortunately for the Woodbury and Nicholas, they were too close to maneuver out of harm's way, even with the signals, because they're next in line. Woodbury, who had been behind Young, had swerved to avoid the collision, but hit another reef and then eventually into a small offshore island. So they kind of went to the right. This is where like that animation that that you watch on YouTube is like really amazing.
You're gonna have to
Because
check it
they go ship by ship and they rewind and then you follow the course of this one and then you rewind and you follow.
Can I just say how much I appreciate that you were like, the second ship, if you remember. No, I don't
I
recall.
don't
Like 18 boat names, Jen. I don't
Also,
remember.
nobody got my
Guys,
front
you're
fell
not
off joke.
like
All I remember
super-
is Summers.
yeah.
I know. I'm really excited to find out what happens. And did I have a mascot?
So the crew of the Woodbury, who's now like aground on this small offshore island, immediately jump off and try to rig the boat to the rocks to keep it in place. But the surf is pounding the boat onto the rocks repeatedly. One by one, the crew clamber across to abandon the ship. That little island is now called Woodbury Rock.
Oh, geez.
Wow.
The SS Nicholas, who was next in line, also attempted to veer left to avoid colliding into the others. So they kind of go off to the left, and then they realize like where they're at, that they're kind of trapped. They try to like stop, but end up battling the current for a while before eventually running aground on the Honda rocks next to the lee. So next in line is the SS Farragut. The skipper sees that something's happening, is able to slow, stop, and then throw it like into reverse. However, in doing this, the Fuller is coming up behind them and they end up side swiping the Fuller,
Oh my gosh.
which careens past them and into the rocks and then kills their power immediately. The Farragut floats damaged out into deep water. So behind that mess, Percival and Summers are frantically trying to avoid this collision, but Summers ends up suffering serious damage to her propellers, dragging on the rocky ground, trying to get out of the area. But both of them get out relatively unscathed.
all right.
So their crew is fine. It's just the boats that sustain some damage. Poor Chauncey Comes
the last one?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the last one of that division.
Yeah.
Comes upon the chaos, but before they can get emergency procedures into place, an undertow shoves them into the capsized Young's exposed propellers, which rip through the side into the engine room, causing an immediate power outage.
Oh my god.
This is so stressful.
It is.
My laughter, like, coping mechanism.
I didn't want to give too much away, but I was like, imagine watching the Titanic and then rewinding it and watching it again, and then rewinding it and watching it a different
12
way.
times.
Yeah,
Man.
14
Gosh.
boats. So now we go on to Division 32, the next group.
There's so much horror. I'm sorry.
So remember good old Roper from the Kennedy?
Oh, yeah.
They had been following behind, but they were significantly more cautious. So Kennedy's bow had been bumped, and they fell back to take a sounding and noticed that they were only at 7 fathoms. So they were going slower, so they were able to use that fathometer or fathometer or whatever it is. And they dropped it in and then went, whoa, wait. We're not like out in the ocean. It's only 7 fathoms here.
Wow.
So they fall back, and they were like,
how much is a fathom?
I know.
It's 2 yards, so that's 14
It's
yards.
3 Amazon boxes.
I didn't have time to look up that.
So they fall back. The Stoddard almost passes the Kennedy, but Roper had been listening in because earlier when they were like, we don't have time to help you out, he was like, I'm going to keep an eye on these guys.
I bet that guy was thrilled.
Yeah. Because remember, he was like kind of butthurt about his interaction.
Yeah.
And so, so he was like, he was probably like eating popcorn, listening, like, but then went, wait. I'm like, these guys, I can still help these guys out. So he like bellows out a signal to Division 32, and they're able to like switch gears. So all of Division 32's ships ultimately avoid the collision.
Yay.
They were the last
Good
grouping.
news.
Jeez.
So the crew's first response was to try and save their ships, to try and like lessen the full amount of damage, then to save as many of the crew as possible. The Nicholas crew realized that their ship is ultimately not like completely doomed. They're not going to sink, so they just stay on board until daylight. The rest of most of the ships are abandoned. Like everyone tries, they can't stay on the ship. The Woodbury and the Fuller crews abandoned to Woodbury Rock. Most sailors are in their sleeping clothes, and they're being battered by the waves and the wind. So they're like wet and cold, and are trying to like just kind of make it through to the morning.
When was this again? Like what time of year?
It's
September.
August.
okay.
September.
Okay.
So the Delphi and the Chauncey, the crew of those ships, are able to climb over to this like precarious kind of cliff area. Some of the crew climb up and then drop lines down to help bring up their remaining crewmates, because it's like a very narrow kind of like, imagine everyone like back to the wall of the cliff. Where then they realize once they get up to the top that there's a thin land bridge that reaches over to the shore. So they're able to like climb up and then go over to safety from there. USS SP Lee crew establish a raft ferry from their emergency rafts and are able to ferry each other back and forth to shore. SS Young was hit the hardest. And that was the first one that ran aground and then capsized. And like I said, several sailors were trapped below deck and never were able to escape. Others washed to their deaths off the deck by the tides and the waves. The remaining crew tied themselves together in an area 6 to 8 feet wide by 25 feet long. So like they tether themselves together so that no more of them will be washed off. The waves eventually drift the Chauncey close to the shore and near enough to the Young that their crew can basically hop over to so that the crew from the Young can then hop onto the Chauncey and then go to shore with the rest of them.
The Chauncey's the hero of this story, besides the Summers.
There was also another thing. I think it was on the Young that like some of the crew this was just like such good in the moment thinking that like someone grabbed a hammer, and because the ship had capsized, so it's like laying on its sides, they smashed out the portholes so that they could use like them to like hang onto and like so they'd have somewhere to grip onto and then climb up.
Oh wow.
Which I just That was really great
Yeah.
thinking in the moment. So the morning of the 9th, the scene is spotted by a Southern Pacific Railroad crew who's working right there because the railroad runs along the coast, going up that direction, up towards Lompoc. And they're able to bring people from Lompoc to come down and help rescue the remaining crew. When the final roll's taken, 23 squadron sailors passed away, 3 from the Delphi and the remaining from the Young. Commander Watson's civilian guest was transported from the site and then lost to history for 40 years.
What?
So, like, he's kind of an enigma in this thing.
Fantastic.
He just was, like, quietly, like, did the, like,
I wasn't there.
awkward sidewalk out of the scene. I was never here.
Yeah,
you never
exactly.
saw me. So,
Gosh.
for 19 days, beginning on September 17th, a court of inquiry sifts through, like, tons of testimony and evidence. They end up recommending that 11 of the officers, they recommend them for general court-martial for their choices leading up to the crash. So Watson, Hunter, Blodgett from the Delphi, the 2 commanders of the divisions, so the commanders of each of those flagships that suffered losses, so only the 2 that suffered losses, and the captains of each wrecked ship. Ironically, the court cites 23 officers and men for their outstanding performance saving lives after the grounding, some of them the same men.
I was going to ask, was
Yeah.
it the same men?
Oh my gosh.
The
Good
men
job,
who got,
government.
commended were also the ones who were court-martialed.
That's wild.
The court-martial convened in early November, and it was the largest number of cases ever brought before a single naval judicial body. After weeks of hearings and testimony, the court found 3 of the officers guilty. So Captain Watson, Lieutenant Commander Hunter, and Lieutenant Commander Roche, who was the skipper of the Nicholas. Rear Admiral S.S. Robeson set Roche's conviction aside. So he basically was like, that was the captain of the Nicholas, who was like so far behind that they were like, he was just doing what he was asked.
Okay.
You know, like he's not ultimately culpable. But Watson and Hunter each lost their chance for any future promotion. Watson and Hunter finished out their naval service in minor posts before both retiring in 1929. Of the 6 other captains who lost ships, 2 eventually commanded battleships, and the others went on to have long Navy careers. No major changes were made to operational procedures because of the accident.
Oh, great.
Cool.
The Navy reconstructed the decimated Desron 11 squadron from ships that had been sitting due to budget cuts. So they had like, when they had done these Clemson destroyers, they had made like a ton of them. And then they were like, yeah, we can't really afford to like put these all out in the water. So they basically were like, oh, we got more ships back in the hangar.
Gosh,
Like,
replacements. Yeah.
So the wrecks were stripped of any critical weapons and records. And they basically were like, we're just going to sell them for scrap. And they can come clean them out. Like if you want to buy them, you have to come get it yourself.
okay.
Multiple people tried to come and recover the wrecks, but they couldn't get them out. So they ended up taking as much that could be seen, and the remaining odd pieces are still there.
That's what I was wondering.
Chauncey can still be seen. And I found like a couple of websites, like diving websites, where they can sometimes, like they talk about it. Basically, like if you can get there, you can go and see it. But the property is now owned by the Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Space Force.
Space
Air
Force.
Force Base. So a modest memorial stands at the point. You would easily pass right by it if you didn't know it was there. It's just a small plaque. But the mangled propeller and shaft of doom, quote unquote, from the Delphi are outside the Veterans Memorial Building in Lompoc.
Wow.
So you can go check that out. So the Honda Point disaster was the largest peacetime loss of U.S. Navy ships. The Navy lost more warships in 10 minutes than it did to the enemy action in World War I.
Oh my gosh, that's wild.
And that is the Honda Point disaster.
That was so good, Jen.
So interesting that you just never hear about it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
had no idea. In fact, I would give it credit if I knew what it was, but my husband was just watching the City TV channel or whatever, and he was like, Jen, come here. I think you'd like this. And like they were talking about it.
Oh, cool.
And I was like, what? I've never heard of this. So
That's
I was like, I
fascinating.
got to do it.
My favorite mental picture of the whole thing was like thinking about Watson having to call it in It'd be like Vader calling in the destruction of the Death Star to the Emperor, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. How do you even say that? Like,
So a thing happened.
we didn't make the speed record.
So you know those 14 ships that we had?
Yeah.
Wow.
Did you want all of them back?
Right.
I know. Well, and the other thing is like, okay, I'm not fully prepared to make this comment, but I'm going to do it anyway. Like the fact that they made no policy changes to,
Yeah.
like, in the last, I don't know, 50 years or whatever, less than that, there have been plane crashes that caused policy changes. So like now, if there's something going wrong on a jetliner or whatever. Am I from the 50s? A jetliner? Like the pilot, you see it in the movie Sully. Like he asks at the last minute, like any ideas of his co-pilot. Like, but they're not asking anybody if they have any ideas. It's like, no, we're just gonna just go.
Like I could see them being like that. Like, well, if you guys had just trusted this new tech, if you had just used it right, like we told you to, you know, or it'll get better next year.
But had it been failing? Like,
well, no, it was new.
It was just new. Okay.
So they were just kind of like half-assed using two different systems instead of using one with their full ass.
And then you're also in the military and like the chain of command, and there's no like the guy on the third ship that's like a little nervous isn't going to be like, excuse me.
Yeah. And
Commander.
that's why like
Right?
they court-martialed everyone who was in charge, but then they went back and said like, okay, but you know, we were just doing what we were told to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I'm sure those people still to this day are like, I should have just like gone with my gut.
Right.
Well, no,
But-
they're dead now. But
Yeah. Well, not all of them, but
Really?
you know. Well,
From
no,
the
because
20s?
only 20. Well,
been
from
100
the
years.
20s.
yeah.
Sorry. Yes, they're probably. I just meant for probably the rest of their life.
yeah.
A lot of those guys probably were like, if I had just listened
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
For sure.
the guy on the Reno.
That happened. The thing with the new
Mr. Roper.
technology. I know, Mr. Roper. Oh, bless him. The Titanic had a similar thing where there were two different like distress calls, and I think right.
Yeah.
And, like they weren't like fully transitioned over to the new tech. Yuck. Wow.
Yeah.
Never learn.
That was a really super interesting story.
It was hard to know where to draw the line on just how in depth to get and just how much information
I
to
think you did
give.
great.
Yeah.
So
That's
That's
perfect.
really good.
yeah.
So does someone have a question for the Magic 8 Ball? Is it Magic 8 Ball time?
I think it is.
Okay. Did Watson cry when he called it in? Who has
No,
the-
I'm sure he was very stoic.
Okay, I'm
Are
gonna.
you going to do it? Okay.
Okay. God, it's so hard to read this 8 ball. It is decidedly so.
He definitely cried.
Yes. Sweet. Oh,
Nice.
man.
He
That
got a
was so
little.
good.
He finally got some humility.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Maybe temporary
Maybe.
humility.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jen.
You're welcome. Let's do it again sometime.
Yeah. All right, team, let's wrap it up.
Bye.
See you next time.
Bye bye.
Thanks for listening to the Ghoul's Guide to Santa Barbara. Like and subscribe on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Ghoul's Guide to SB.
Our website is ghoulsguidetosb.com. Got a spooky story or know of a haunted or paranormal location in Santa Barbara? Send it to us at ghoulsguidetosb@gmail.com.